Climate change has started to affect everyone and every aspect of humanity more than ever over the past few decades. However, it does not affect everyone equally. The vagaries of climate change crisis are felt so deeply by women across the world as compared to men. It would not be wrong to say that the climate change crisis deteriorates gender inequality and disproportionately affects women, particularly in low-income regions where poverty and inadequate education are prevalent. As per the last relevant UN report published in 2009 titled Women, Gender Equality and Climate Change, women are more vulnerable to the effects of climate change crisis than men, primarily as they constitute the majority of the world's poor and are more dependent for their livelihood on natural resources that are threatened by climate change. Moreover, women don't have many options and freedom to adapt to any calamity and crisis due to climate change crisis, as they face persistent social, economic and political setbacks. Women's empowerment and their full involvement in climate action are much more needed at present than ever in the past if the world is serious about meeting net zero goals and transitioning into a climate-friendly ecosystem and global economic structure. How does climate change affect women more than men? Women are more likely to bear the brunt of the climate change crisis and suffer the consequences of cataclysmic climate change effects all over the world. In a Feminist Climate Justice, a Framework for Action report published by the United Nations Women in 2023, climate change may plunge at least 158 million women and girls into poverty by 2050, which is 16 million more than men, which is a massive gap. Now, displacement due to ravaging floods, storms, heat waves, cyclones, drought and tsunamis, among other vagaries of nature due to climate change, is also a persistent challenge. It becomes worse when migration also affects women way more than men. The UN Environmental Study, published in 2022, reveals that 80% of people displaced by climate change constitute women, facing increased risks of poverty, violence, and unintended pregnancies. Even as women and girls are the hardest hit by the climate emergency, less than 1/3 of the countries globally have some sort of national climate action plans that indicate a commitment to upholding sexual and reproductive health care, as per the UNFA report released in 2023. Did you know that climate change kills more women than men? According to the UNDP report in 2022, women and children are 14 times more likely to die due to climate change induced disasters than men. For instance, researchers claim that out of the 230,000 people killed in 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, women constituted 70% of deaths. After effects of climate change only deteriorated women's lives across the globe, giving rise to gender violence too. In an analysis of more than 130 studies by the media, 68% of women were more impacted by climate-related health issues than men. Air pollution causes miscarriages in pregnant women. As the climate change crisis aggravates on a perpetual basis in different regions of the world, women's sufferings keep getting compounded. Pregnant women have been at the receiving end of the climate change crisis, as it is causing miscarriages and premature and sudden deaths of newborn babies. Climate change is an urgent threat to pregnant women and children. The Lancet Planetary Health Report in 2021 analyzed data from over 34,000 mothers who had at least one pregnancy loss. Out of these, 77% were from India. All these were estimated deaths due to exposure to ambient air and fine particles present in the environment. It said suboptimal air quality contributes to a considerable fraction of total pregnancy loss in South Asia. The UN report in 23 further corroborates this. Climate change poses an existential threat to all of us, but pregnant women, babies and children face some of the gravest consequences of all. Now, climate change starts affecting even unborn children and babies in a mother's womb, which causes pregnancy-related complications. And these complications could last forever in a child. Domestic violence also increases due to climate change crisis. The climate change crisis has led to escalating domestic violence and gender violence threats against women. The sixth assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, had earlier in 2022 established the link between the climate change crisis and gender inequalities and vulnerabilities. The Lancet Planetary Health, in a 2022 report titled Extreme Events and Gender-Based Violence, a Mixed Methods Systematic Review, also reveals links between extreme weather and climate change crisis disasters with an increase in gender-based violence (GBV) against women across the world. The study reveals an increase in one or several GBV forms during or after extreme events, often related to economic instability, food insecurity, mental stress, disrupted infrastructure, increased exposure to men, tradition, and exacerbated gender inequality. The patriarchal nature of society and gender roles across the world exacerbated gender inequalities and inequities during and after extreme events. Moreover, the report also highlighted that sexual and gender minorities, mostly women, were blamed for the natural calamities. They blamed women for the climate change disasters, describing them as God's punishment for their sins. The same study also suggested that drivers of violence and violence increased during and after storms in parts of the world. For instance, after cyclones due to climate change and extreme weather events, physical and sexual violence against women in India saw a dramatic increase. Moreover, forced marriage and trafficking witnessed a rise in Bangladesh during and after Cyclone Roanu and other storms. Why do women face more problems due to climate change? Women face persistent challenges, recurring domestic and sexual violence, and uncertain future and present due to several societal, economic reasons at multiple levels across the world. Predetermined gender roles for women, biases against them, and very low levels of economic freedom make them easy targets of the harsh consequences of climate change induced catastrophes across the world. They neither have the power to mitigate the deadly effects of climate change, nor are they equipped enough to adapt to the climate change crisis anywhere on the planet. For instance, women were not able to swim and save their lives during the tsunami in India in 2004. The long clothing hampered the movement of women, killing many of them. Although women are highly dependent on natural resources for their livelihood and to sustain their families during a challenging time, they have minimal or no access to resources that could allow them equal power in the decision-making process at the government level or even in private institutes. For example, women constitute 50% to 80% of the world's food production workforce. However, they own less than 10% of the land. All these factors, including lesser access to resources needed to mitigate and adapt to climate change, limited role in decision-making processes, and the nature of a male-dominated society make them highly vulnerable to climate change crisis across the world. Centuries of subjugation of women in areas related to equal gender rights, human rights, political positioning, economic backwardness, no control over natural resources such as land, and shoddy education have only deteriorated their sufferings when seen from the lens of climate change crisis. Why women must be involved in climate action? Now, it's crucial to increase all attempts aimed at involving women in climate action at global, national, local and hyperlocal levels. The primary reason is that women are more vulnerable to climate change disasters. Hence, the success of the global fight against the unfolding climate change apocalypse depends on the participation of a large number of women and their commitment to net zero targets. Moreover, women's participation in the climate action means a more sustainable future for everyone, everywhere. A research published in 2005 suggests the nations with higher proportions of women in parliament are more prone to ratify environmental treaties than other nations. Women give far better results in climate solutions. For instance, the United Nations study suggests that women can increase agricultural yields by 20% to 30% when given the same access to resources as men. This only means that women can produce even better results when they receive proper training, resources, and technology to engage in sustainable farming. Moreover, women are the first responders to the climate change crisis at the community level. Therefore, empowering women to mitigate and adapt to the climate change crisis means stronger and more climate resilient actions.